Okay, so I'm going to be talking very personally about my friendship with Sangharakshita, with Bhante. Yes, it's not really me trying to do an overview of who he was as a man, as a boy, or as a monk, or anything like that, just as a friend. And it sort of means I'm going to be telling you a little bit about my history and how it coincided with his. And it's just going to be like anecdotal and stories and stuff. But as Abhayanara said, I ended up with quite a good friendship with him at the end, in his last 5 years of his life. And actually, if anybody can't hear, can you just ask me to speak louder? And I can easily do it. Yeah, I will do. Yeah, so I became quite good friends with him, and we were lucky to work on a couple of projects together, me and Bhante, which was an idea of Paramarthas, which I would interview Bhante around different things, and we got into a real rapport, and then we just ended up with a friendship and a rapport between each other, which we then, just enjoyed each other's company at different times. So in my inbox named Bhante, I have probably at least 50 emails from him, and I probably met up with him maybe once or twice a month over that period, over about 5 years. Yeah. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about me navigating the Sangharakshita that we have in our lives, okay? And it seems to start in the 26th of March 1987. And if you were to ask for ordination in 1987, you wrote to Sangharakshita, yeah? There's a few people in the room who would have done exactly that, yeah, Bhajadevi and Siran, no doubt, and some of you were ordained by him. And so I wrote to him, and he replied to let me know that he'd received his letter. And it's very formal, so I'll just start. It gives you a bit of a tone, because the tone's going to change quite a lot over the next so many years, and you're going to hear that, okay? Dear Rachel, thank you for your letter dated 14th of March 1987. I was very glad to hear from you and to know what had been happening, both internally and externally, since the last time you wrote. I was also writing to him quite a bit. Naturally, I'm particularly glad that you have asked for ordination in your own way. He's obviously quoting me back here quite a lot. This is what he's doing. As is our custom, I shall consult with those order members who know you, and you can expect to receive some feedback from them. I'm also glad to have that you have realised that you have got to trust people. I should have read this before I read it all out. Without trust, there is no spiritual friendship and no Sangha. With metta, Sangharakshita. So that's where we start. And I did actually write to him quite a bit. That's what you did. You wrote to him. You wrote to a few people. I was living in Glasgow. There's no Dharmacharis. Well, then there are Dharmacharis. The nearest is Norwich. That's quite a long way. I mean, or London. And I was meeting one or two of them if they were running retreats. Sometimes Parami or somebody came up to Scotland and ran a retreat. Otherwise, you were writing to Sangharakshita. I was writing to Sangharakshita. So a solitary retreat in particular in January '91, I think I was on a short 2 or 3 weeks solitary, and I wrote at least 2 letters from him to him, and they would have been long and on foolscap paper, lined 6 or 7 sides at least, you know. So, but he wrote to me. He replied to all of it. So this is addressed to Parvati, 26th of 1st, 91, and then the next time he writes is in March. Dear Rachel, thank you for your long and interesting letter dated 16th of January 91. I was glad to hear from you again and to know what you've been doing. You have clearly had a few realizations about yourself, which is good news, and I hope the process will continue. Maybe you really are a Saddhanandi, that's a faith type. Even if you're not, there should always be a place for beauty in spiritual life, indeed in human life. Suffering is, I think, inherent in conditioned existence, and to the extent that we can accept the one, we must accept the other. In any case, sort of suffering that we usually experience is no great deal, though it does teach us something if only we let it. With much metta, Sangharakshita. And then he wrote in March, Dear Rachel, thank you for your letter dated 11th of February. I was glad to know that your solitary was as productive and appreciative and appreciated your sharing your various thoughts with me. Sorry to hear that you're not happy with your relationship with an Order member in Glasgow, and I hope this will soon be sorted out. Here in London, I rather enjoyed the snow, even though it meant I could not get out very much. At present, I am very busy preparing for Dharma Rinpoche's death anniversary celebration. Perhaps some of you will be coming down from Glasgow for the occasion. With much metta, Sangharakshita. So that's where we start. And so from then on, I'm just writing to him, and he's occasionally coming to Glasgow. And he comes to Glasgow at one point to meet the Windhorse Publications team. And by then I'm working for Windhorse Publications, and we have a little tea party for him. You probably did this in Birmingham, did you? Yeah. He used to come and see the Windhorse team. And I remember he was, there was two things, it features me quite a bit, this is unfortunately, but this is how it is in your mind. I remember I was cooking him lasagna in the women's community in Glasgow. I was cooking him dinner, and I was cooking him lasagna, and I was making homemade profiteroles. Easy, with hot chocolate sauce, filled, with double cream and all that. Anyway, he eats his lasagna, and I say to him, profiteroles. He said, no, I won't have profiteroles. And I said, well, just have profiteroles. And he said, all right then, but I won't have the chocolate sauce. I said, well, you have to have the chocolate sauce. It's not anything without the chocolate sauce. And he said, no, I won't have the chocolate sauce. I said, no, you have to. He said, all right, I'll have the chocolate sauce. And then later I heard he was on a diet. I thought, oh. Anyway, he had profiteroles, he had lasagna, profiteroles, chocolate sauce. And then I remember, in another Windhorse Publications meeting with him, he was talking a lot about Alama Govinda, and then talking about his wife, Ligotami. And at some point he said she went to Rodin in Brighton, which is a seriously posh girls' school in Brighton. And I sort of went, oh, like that. And, he said, oh, do you know it? And I said, yes. And he said, did you go there? I said, no, but you can't tell. I'm just trying to give you a sense of how I was, even at that stage, I think I somehow, I was just like quite sort of cheeky. And Subhuti told me once he wasn't sure about that Saddhanandi, and there were times when I think he wasn't sure about it at all, but he gradually got to like it. And he'd be like that with me back here. And so anyway, from then on, I write to him less because there are more Dhammacharis around. I'm doing Mitra study, I'm more in the system of ordination or going on retreat or whatever. And there are Dhammacharis that I'm writing to rather than Bhante. So there's a big gap now. Occasionally he comes to Taraloka. I remember he'd visit Taraloka and be on the women's Mitra conveners meeting, and then we'd have supper with him, all that sort of thing. So that was going on in the background. He came and dedicated the Taraka at Taraloka. But at some point, and I was also on ordination retreat in Norwich when Kudashri and Kudaprabha got ordained. And he was running the retreat, or he was running the retreat, he was ordaining them. And just got to be around him and have a one-to-one meeting with him. And what I began to think was, I find this guy quite difficult to be around. I don't find the communication very easy. It can be a bit sort of stilted. I don't know what I'm doing with him. I don't know if I've got any question to ask him. So why don't I just know I don't need to have these meetings and stop pursuing them or trying to make a connection with him. But what I did know was I began to meet him more and more through his writing. And that's where we forged a relationship very strongly. So when I was 18 or 19, this time I was living in Kent, and I was travelling to London to attend an art school in London just for a while. And on the train, I was reading English classics. So you commute 50 minutes from Tunbridge Wells to London, and I was reading the English classics. And at some point, when I'm walking away from the train back to my parents' house, I think, I'm never going to read anything else. I'm just going to read classics. They have such an impact on me. Why would I do anything? Why would I read anything else? And then when I was in Glasgow, I mentioned this to a Dharmacharya, and she said, well, just think of all the books you've never read then. And I thought, this person doesn't understand something. I don't understand it either, but she certainly doesn't understand it. I knew that there was something about what I'd done as this young 19-year-old that was a hallmark in my life, or something. And I was trying to explain something to her, but she didn't understand it and I didn't understand it. But Bhante did. So when I went on another solitary retreat, this is what I read. So this paragraph, or the explanation here, holds good only for the Dharmanusarin who has been disillusioned, or rather of the person who has been disillusioned, who sees the need for refuge and has started looking for it. In the case of the Sadhunusarin, or person with the more devotional, more emotional, more ascetic approach, she may well have found her refuge before even paradoxically she felt the need for any refuge. Everyone laughs in astonishment. It's like when you're young and you start reading. What do you read first of all? You read anything you can lay your hands on. Any sort of comic, or cheap novel, or a copy of the dictionary. You read anything. But one day, by sheer chance, just because you happen to find it on the shelf, you happen to read some Shakespeare or Milton, and you think, well, this is 10 times, 100 times better. And then you go on reading that sort of thing. You give up reading all your comics and all the rest of it. But it's not that you get so fed up with the comics that you start thinking, where can I find a refuge from this sort of stuff? Where can I find a better kind of literature? It doesn't usually happen like that, does it? Just by accident, you stumble upon something better. All at once you see, you feel how much better it is. You're quite happy with your comics, so long as you didn't encounter Shakespeare. But having encountered Shakespeare, you find him so much better. With the same human interest, but how much better. The same imagination, but how much better. And from then on, you're sold on Shakespeare. So that's when I realised, okay, when I read that, it was like Bhante was saying to me, you're on the map. I know who you are. You're doing a classic. I'm doing such a classic thing, and he's actually listing it in the book, for goodness sake. Hasn't, before I've even done anything, And he's saying to me, you're a faith type, and you're ruled by beauty, and you're ruled by what's attracting you, not dukkha, not suffering, not something pushing you from behind. Okay? I mean, there is that in my life, but more and more, I say to people, I know the Dharma, I know Sangharakshita's work a lot, not because I want information. I want words of power. I want words that are going to change my life. I'm a faith type. Yeah? So when I read that, I found myself. This is probably when I wrote to him and said, I think I'm a faith type. And this is where he's replied. So there's quite a lot of things that I met Bhante through his text. I remember once I was giving a series of talks on the Bodhicharya on an ordination retreat in Spain. This is in way back 2008, I think. And I was doing a lot of talks on the Bodhicharya, and I was investigating patience at this time. And I stumbled across this little paragraph from Bhante where I've never been able to find it again, so I'm assuming he did say this. So this is what I remember. He says this: patience and forbearance is not so much your ability to withstand pain that gets stronger and stronger. It's that the thing that you think is getting hurt gets weaker and weaker. So, and then I would just be reading him and building a relationship with him. And I read a lot of seminars. When I was in Glasgow, officially at that time, Mitras weren't supposed to read seminars, but I was reading seminars. So you heard him in relationship with other people. You heard him laboriously until it was tedious, trying to answer the same question over and over again. And you just watched what he did with things, and you watched how he drew things out. I remember once he did whole pages on shunyata. This is in the nature of, not in the nature of mind, what's it called? In the nature of existence seminar. And I used it once on a retreat, and people could not believe that was Sangharakshita speaking, because it's so interesting. He's trying to explain what it is, and he's trying to talk about how it's not, you can't take things, you can't take life literally in a way. He's trying to show you what concepts are, and he's drawing you into a very poetic sort of frame of mind. And in that frame of mind, you're more loose, and you're able to understand a bit more what he's trying to say. It's an interesting conversation. When I was ordained, I took the Shakyamuni sadhana, and there's this little talk. It was called "The Ideal of Human Enlightenment." It would have been a really early talk by Bhante, and it just describes so beautifully how we relate to enlightenment. And how we relate to enlightenment, because there's something in enlightenment that we also have. We have that ability to get enlightened. And because we have the ability to get enlightened, we can relate to it as a goal or an ideal. And he's drawing this out very beautifully. And then he just says at the end, nowadays we have to recognise that many people are sceptical about ideals, and especially so perhaps about spiritual ideals, about the possibility of transforming the real into the ideal. Buddhism, however, is not sceptical. It has faith in the ideal, faith in the spiritual ideal, faith in the ideal of human enlightenment. And it's faith in the ideal because it has faith in man, in the creative potential of man. And because it has faith in us, it asks us to have faith in ourselves. It does not ask us to believe, least of all to believe in Buddhism. Instead, it asks us to take the ideal of human enlightenment as a practical working hypothesis. It asks us to make the experiment. It asks us to try. And then just one more quote from him, and then I'll give you a bit of a look into the emails that exchanged between us, and then some of my experiences of him in Adhisthana. So it's just so practical, actually. So here we go. The ego. He's talking about getting rid of the ego. Okay? The ego doesn't exist even on an empirical or relative level, let alone as a real object of perfect wisdom. At the same time, the term refers to a genuine experience. We have habits of selfishness, and our task is to transform these habits. If we introduce an imaginary object called the ego or the I into the discussion, we complicate the process unnecessarily. You are functioning as an ego when you are closed in on yourself, when you shut yourself off from other people, when you're more outward-going and expansive on the other hand, when you're engaging with the concerns of others, you are functioning from non-ego. It's not necessarily true, but let's hope it is. These are two very different experiences, one reactive and one creative. In a reactive state, you feel cold and hard, as though there's a tight little ball inside you, or as if you're constantly circling back on yourself. But in a creative state, you feel free and open, expansive and flowing. There is warmth, radiation, a spiralling outwards and upwards. Note that I'm using the image of expanding and contracting, which, like all images, are to be understood properly. It is not that the ego is expanding or contracting. The ego is the contraction of one's being around a delusion, and a non-ego is the expansion of one's being. But this expansion is not just inflation. It is a mode of action that does not feed or reinforce that delusion. So we're looking for a mode of action that does not feed or reinforce that delusion. So I get invited to move to Adhisthana in 2014, and I moved there at the start of 2015. And I get invited to be chair, and then because I get invited to be co-chair, and because Vajragupta's already there and he's going to be my co-chair with me, Bhante hasn't been told all the information, and he's been told Vajragupta is chair. So when he hears that I'm coming down to be co-chair, he calls a halt, and I get a letter via Vajragupta. Vajragupta writes saying, there are some lines in this letter, Saddhanandi, that I wish I could rub out or erode or something. I could see exactly which lines they were. And I realise I've got to make a decision about, do I leave Tariloka, stop being chair, leave Tariloka, and just go into Adhisthana, because it's not going to be what I thought it was. I'm not going to be co-chair at Adhisthana. Or what do I do? Do I just leave everything? I mean, what do I do? And I was getting quite a lot of contradictory advice. Well, actually I wasn't. I was getting mostly one kind of advice. And I was trying to think it through for myself. And actually I thought, Adhisthana does actually need me. I don't know what I'll be doing, but Adhisthana does need me. And I thought the women's wing needs me, actually, in that situation. And I've been serving the women's wing for a long time in Glasgow and then in Tariloka, so why not in Adhisthana? And I didn't know what I'd be doing, possibly moving the dustbins around or whatever, but I would do it in my own particular way. And I thought, okay, so I've got to start making friends with Sangharakshita. And by this time he's like maybe 90 years old. And I knew about 90-year-old people because I lived with Ratshuri for 20 years, and she was quite old by the time she and I partied in that house. So I knew about what you do in this situation. So I did it. I'm a very good person. And I get down to, I write him a bit, I quote things, quote back to himself in a positive way and things like that. And then I get down there and Paramartha says, what about you doing this series of interviews with him to try and create a bit of a story of Bhante's life through objects. A bit like, those of you that know Radio 4, the history of the world in 100 objects. So we had the history of Sangharakshita in, I think, 3 objects a decade, and by then he'd done like maybe 8 decades, whatever that is. So I was doing these interviews. And we started very wary of each other, but happy that we were working on a project together, and gradually the rapport kind of builds up between us. And he's very sweet, actually. I will say he's got a lot of etiquette, and he's very polite. So sometimes I would hear that he couldn't manage a meeting with me because he'd not slept well or he wasn't feeling well, and he would be super apologetic and would always say, I know you're really busy, Saddhanandi, I'm so sorry I can't make the meeting. And he would always send me an email afterwards and apologise and rearrange and stuff like that. So he just never ever took me for granted, as it were. So on the 14th of April, he sends me an email. This is roughly what I've just said, actually. Dear Saddhanandi, so this is the end, 14th of April 2015. Dear Saddhanandi, I'm sorry I had to let you down yesterday, as I'd slept very badly the previous night and had little energy. Please let me know when you'll be free, and we shall try to get together again. The sooner the better. You'd be glad to know that last night, by way of compensation, I slept for nearly 11 hours. Let us hope the trend continues. I trust that you've not had too many meetings since we last met. With love, Sangharakshita. So we start doing these interviews, yeah, and they're on these different objects and stuff. And there's one nice. I mean, I had a lot of very nice meetings with him. We'd talk through a few things we might talk about. Then I'd go away. Then I'd prepare it, like the kind of questions I wanted to ask, where we needed to go with it. And then I'd go and see him, and then we do a straight cut, as it were. And I remember once I said to him, I've got a few questions, do you want to know what they are? He said, that's no surprise, me, Saddhanandi. It had this sort of spontaneous love, this love of sort of being spontaneous and just being drawn out, yeah? And he would always know, I tried to put some questions around his life, and then later in his when we did interviews on his poetry, that were a bit tricky or a bit kind of edgy, and he'd always know exactly which ones they were, and he'd go, and then off he'd go and answer it. And I remember once going there, some of you will have heard this story, but I went there one morning, and the clocks had changed. So it was, I always met him at 10 o'clock in the morning, and because the clocks had changed, I felt it was still 9 o'clock in the morning. Okay, so it had gone that way, so it was 9 o'clock in the morning, really. And he wanted to meet us at 10, so I went there, so it's quite early in the morning, and he wanted me to do an interview on this piece of green jade that he got from New Zealand. And I'd done all my research, and he wanted me to. Green jade's interesting from New Zealand because it's a tribal ritual object, you know, and it's actually handed from one chief to another often. And you know, certain warriors have green jade weapons and stuff like that. And he had this big piece, about as big as my hand, that stood up, which he had bought himself. And he'd written a poem about green jade, and he wanted me to read that. So I get there, and I said, okay, we're going to do this, I'm going to interview about this, then we're going to do that, then we're going to do the green jade. He said, yes, and I want you to read the poem, Saddhanandi, on the green jade. I said, okay, and he hands me the book. I knew he was going to do this, so I already had it, but he hands me the book. And I said, okay, so I just read that when we get to the green jade. He says, yes, but I'd like us to rehearse it. I'm like, what are you like? It's really 9 o'clock in the morning. He said, I know. And I said, quite hard to work with sometimes, Bhante. He said, you need to work with me more often, Saddhanandi, like this. This is what we're doing together. So I go, okay, off I go. Green jade. Here I go, read the poem, yeah? And afterwards he said, I finished the rehearsal, and he said, I think it could do with more expression. I said, oh, goodness sake, what's it like? It's 9 o'clock in the morning. And then I said, I suppose it's not many times you get a chance to get somebody to rehearse the poem with you or something like that. I said, no, exactly. And then off we go with the interview. Then the interview goes out, it all goes out online, you can find them online. It gets put into an exhibition in Adhisthana where all the objects are in Adhisthana. People walk around with headphones, listening to the interviews, and it's an amazing success. Although I didn't know it would be, because I'm just in this bubble with me and Bhante, and we really didn't know if it would add up to anything. I remember saying to Bhante, I don't know if anyone's going to really like this or want to hear this. And he said, well, Saddhanandi, they'll be very forgiving. Which I thought was a nice nice angle, actually. Yeah. Anyway, at the end of the interviews, he called me in to see him, and he said, I want to give you a present. And I said, oh, okay. And he said, I want to give you a present for the interviews. And I said, okay. And then he said, I want to give you the green jade. Which was quite strong. And yeah, it was quite strong to receive that from him. And he said, I wanted to give you something that I'd bought myself. I hadn't just been given it by somebody else. I think because he didn't want me to meet somebody who'd given it to me as well. But I think he also wanted to give me something he bought himself, and he wanted to give me this green jade, which, you know, from a ritual point of view, it felt very strong for me. By then I was chair. And several years later, after he died, and I was thinking about handing on the chairmanship of Adhisthana, I thought, I'm going to give this jade, this green jade, to Adhisthana, and this will become the symbol of Adhisthana, and this is what will get handed on from one chair to the next. If it's with me, it's lovely, but it's really just an ornament, really. It's, how can it, you don't keep it. A ritual object needs to be part of a ritual, so I handed it over to Adhisthana, and then Kiran when he became chair, took it up, and then he has it in his room. And it feels beautiful to have that as a symbol of Adhisthana, partly because I received it from Bhante myself, and partly because it's a very open symbol. It's not Buddhist. It's got a huge history, a ritual history, and a piece of stone is anything anyone wants it to be, you know? And Adhisthana needed something that open right to the centre of it. Okay. Here we go. 2017. Many thanks for your, dear Saddhanandi, many thanks for your latest email, written from green and pleasant Kent. I'm glad you're able to rest there, and also to continue with your art education. I think I was going to see a lot of exhibitions. Yes, I'm back at Adhisthana after more than a week away. You've been in hospital. Nurses are indeed angels, but nonetheless, hospital is a bit like hell. The difference between there and here could hardly be greater. Now I'm recuperating and picking up a few of the old threads. Life here is not quite the same as it was before my departure for hospital, but by this time you must be back in the Sangha, and I hope it will not be long before we meet. Meanwhile, all power to elbow, whatever you may be doing. Yours with much love, Sangharakshita. And then a few months later, many thanks for your recent card, which has just been read to me. I can well understand the difficulty you feel in switching from the Adhisthana administrative role to the ordination retreat mode, especially as the ordinations are to be held in Spain. Anyway, I'm sure you'll manage it, as you seem to have a very versatile personality which adapts very quickly to the change of venue and change of demand. Cats. What a pity you can't let the little cat more into your life. I was telling him that I had a cat visiting me. They're both living with me now. Perhaps by the time you get back, she will have kittens, and the problem will have been sextupled. Names, of course, are difficult things. This is probably cats or order members. I don't know which one. By now, okay. Names, of course, are difficult things. Whether for cats or dogs or new order members. Okay, so he's in this world. Yeah. I agree with Sangharakshita that we have to be mindful of the Indian dimension of the order and of what might seem strange to Indian ears. And then he goes on, I certainly enjoyed the birthday celebrations and had no complaint about the cake. My thoughts will continue to be with you as you get on with the ordinations in Spain. May you and the other retreatants have an enjoyable, inspiring ordination retreat, and may you have a safe return to Adhisthana. By all means, let us have a catch-up as soon as possible after your return with memories of the previous few weeks, when memories of previous few weeks are still be fresh. And then I've got a little thing here called beer. This is the correspondence called beer. So I used to take him a certain pastry in to see him, and he would probably wouldn't eat all of it, he'd eat a bit of it. Dear Saddhanandi, many thanks for the pastry, which went down very well with my non-alcoholic beer. I hope it will not be long before we meet again. Perhaps you could suggest a few dates. This is July the 20th. Then, a few hours later, I write, well, I had no idea you were now drinking non-alcoholic beer instead of tea. That's news. I'm in a phase of being at Adhisthana without being involved with any particular events, which is a real relief as it means I can engage more one-pointedly with various things on my computer. So I'm gradually catching up with correspondence. I'm also continuing to feed the mother hedgehog and her baby, which I'm enjoying. They tend to appear around 9:30 each evening and they're sleeping under pranya pramita during the day. Yes, it would be lovely to meet up soon. I assume your preferred time of meeting is around 12 to 1. So that means I'm available Saturday, Sunday, blah, blah, blah. And then he says, tomorrow will suit me very well for our meeting. I look forward to further news about the mother hedgehog and her baby. Do I want to read all these out to you? I'm just trying to give you a bit of a flavour of it, really. There were lots of them. Let's just leave it there. I remember once, this gets quoted in Nalabodi's book, so I'm just going to tell as much as possible what happened. So I get quoted as someone calling Bhante sweetheart. So I just need you guys to know what really happened, okay? So I was walking up to see him, and then one of his friends comes down and says he's had a very bad night and he won't be able to meet you this morning. And I said, fine, but I'm going to come anyway and just say hello to him and tell him I know. So I go into his room and say, hi Bhante, it's Saddhanandi. He says, Saddhanandi, we shake hands like we always do. He always says cold hands, which is always, in comparison to him, it was always true. And then I said, I know you haven't slept well and we shouldn't do any conversations this evening, this morning. And he said, no, I haven't slept well and I don't feel very good. And I said, that's fine. I'm going to go into town. Do you want any shopping? It's the same as the Prophet arose, in fact. He says, no, it's fine. And I said, I could get you some nice fruit juice or a piece of cake. He said, no, it's fine. And then I said, what about a nice piece of fruit? Would you like a nice piece of fruit? He said, I think I'd quite like a mango. I said, sweetheart, I'll get you a mango. Off I went. That's how it was, okay? So that sounds a bit different, doesn't it? And I was doing a load of interviews with him around his poems. He'd asked me to do these interviews and he chose the poems that he wanted. So I'll just tell you a little bit about one of them. I got to know a lot about his family actually through that, because there was some based on his family, dreams he had about his mum and his dad, and meetings he had with his sister. But we did the Bodhisattva Reply, which is a very strong poem. Actually, it was a bit too strong for me to have to keep reading over and over again. And the verses are, it's like the witnessing of different events in London, in India. And yeah, they're very strong. And I was having to draw him out around the different verses. And there's a verse, and I haven't got it in front of me, so there's a verse towards the end where the Bodhisattva replies. Because all the way through the poem, it's been saying, I will say nothing, but, you know, what would the Bodhisattva say to this? What would the Bodhisattva say to this? What would the Bodhisattva say to this? And then, eventually in the verse, the last verse, there's the Bodhisattva reply. And by then, I've sort of become undone by all these other verses and going into the kind of, just episodes of Indian life. And in the interview, he tries to tell me what the Bodhisattva is doing and what the Bodhisattva is saying. What the Bodhisattva would do in that situation, I will fold him into compassion's arms, etc., etc. And I knew he was telling me something which I couldn't get a hold of. And as somebody who was interviewing him, I didn't have big enough questions for him, if you see what I mean. My questions could only come in on this level. He was trying to tell me something on a different level. And I couldn't do it justice, basically. I knew that. He was trying to say something, and I couldn't do it justice in that moment. So I felt very sad about that. And he also knew I was going to ask him right at the end about Ambedkar, and whether Ambedkar was a Bodhisattva. I tend to believe he is myself, but I wanted to ask him that question. So he already forewarned. And I said to him, have you got any concluding remarks? And he says this beautiful thing. He says, well, some people think that Dr. Ambedkar is a bodhisattva. And when you look at what he's done, you can see maybe he has acted like a bodhisattva. Nobody could have done what he did. And he was the man with vision. They couldn't, the other people around him didn't have that. He was the man with vision. And whatever he was, it shows each one of us what a single individual can do. Not every person is such high calibre, so intelligent as Ambedkar. But even so, each one of us can make a difference. So it's beautiful. It's just a beautiful 2-3 minutes at the end. Okay, so just finish one more thing. I think it was archetypal, if you like, that the chair of Adhisthana, first chair of Adhisthana and Bhante, who was living there, had a rapport. It was needed, and he had it, and that was great. And he was really, really appreciative of the work that I was doing, and it felt like I was serving his vision by serving Adhisthana, but he was also serving me, serving Adhisthana, if you see what I mean. There were moments when, I don't know, we'd be having conversations, or he would be trying to do an interview or something like that. He was getting more and more old. And I knew that he was doing what was needed, and he was doing that partly in service to me. He's a guy who's serving the Dharma, basically. He's serving the Dharma right to the end. I was exchanging emails with him until the last moment, and I saw him 6 days before he died. And actually, I did have that email. I was going to read that to you. It's a very here we go. The 21st of October, 2018. I haven't told you about the tea party you did for me. Okay, let's not go there now. We'll just do this. So this is maybe 8 days before he dies. I think he dies on the 30th of October. Dear Saddhanandi, thanks for your email of yesterday, which reached me this morning, Sunday. I'm sorry to say that for the last few days, including today itself, I've been feeling rather out of sorts, though I have seen a few people the same. I'm not quite sure where to go from here, but I certainly do not feel like meeting people in relatively large numbers. I was probably asking him to meet a load of people for one reason or another. For one reason or another, I've become averse to food, and I'm having to subsist on a few things that I really like. I shall tell you the whole story next time we meet. Much love, Sangharakshita. So I do go and see him a few days later, and he's living off Jaffa cakes. That's what he's doing. And we have Jaffa cakes. And people around him are thinking it's to do with the stomach, but it's actually heart failure. And as soon as the nurse knows he's living off Jaffa cakes and does a few tests, but I think it's just I think there's certain ways that heart failure shows up, which you can sort of throw you onto a different track. But it was heart failure, and he dies, I think, within 24 hours after, well, certainly within 24 hours being hospitalised. And yeah, that's what I haven't told you about our tea party, so now I don't know where to go. No, I won't go there, let's just say this. So, we don't know this, but we're running a big residential course that's lasting for 4 weeks, and I'm involved with that. And I'm having lunch in the dining room, and somebody comes and speaks to me, and they say an ambulance is going to arrive, and they're going to take Sangharakshita, they're going to take Bhante to hospital. We don't want lots of people to know yet, because we don't want it to go out onto Facebook and all sorts of things before we've made an official announcement about what's going on. And I think I might look out the window when I hear the ambulance image, or maybe somehow I see this, the ambulance coming, and then maybe he's sitting outside and they get him on a wheelchair and get him into the ambulance. And there's a moment where I could run out and say goodbye. And I don't. Because once, many years before, I stopped him in the courtyard and spoken to him, and he didn't like it. And somehow you still end up not certain about what you can do with people sometimes. And in that moment, I didn't run out and say goodbye. And that was it. And he was dead. And it's not to do with it's to do with that missed opportunity that you sometimes have in friendship, for whatever reason, whether the person dies or whether the person moves or whether the momently is just not there anymore and you don't take it. So it's to do with that. Yeah. So that